Oke, lanjut ke selanjutnya, benign diffuse pulmonary disorder. Kita baca dulu key konsepnya. Epidemiology, diffuse benign pulmonary disorder cover a broad range of primary lung disease and can be associated with systemic disorder. Pathophysiology, most benign pulmonary disorder are derived from intrinsic or extrinsic injury. Such injury can take form a cellular and/or humoral immunology injury triggered by inhaled antigens, infectious agents, or autoimmune process. Chemical injury from smoking or certain drugs has also been implicated. Clinical feature: most presenting symptoms include progressive dyspnea, and other symptoms include chest pain, wheezing, or hemoptysis. Physical signs include a heavy use of accessory muscle of breathing, cyanosis, and clubbing. Systemic signs of illness seen with some illness include fatigue, weight loss, and malaise. Diagnostic: most diffuse benign disorder are characterized by plain chest radiography, computed tomography, and open or video associated thoracoscopic lung biopsy. Most of these disorders have characteristic radiologic pulmonary parenchymal pattern, adenopathy, sample sarcoidosis, and histologic characteristic. Bronchoscopy with transbronchial biopsies or bronchoalveolar lavage, fine needle aspiration biopsy, and sputum culture or cytologist is also helpful in many cases. Finally, a complete blood count with a differential example eosinophilic process and serum chemistries are helpful in some cases. And then treatment. Although treatment recommendations vary with the particular pulmonary process, many are corticosteroid based, while others are predicated on removal of an inciting agent. And clinical outcome vary widely according to the particular process. And in introduction, diffuse benign pulmonary disorder cover a broad range of primary lung disease, but may also be associated with systemic disorder. This range of chronic conditions such as idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis or IPF associated with poor survival to acute disease of hypersensitivity pneumonitis or HP, with usually good response to the treatment. Some of these diseases have unique clinical characteristics, while others share similar radiographic changes, symptom, or pulmonary function abnormalities. Therapies differ for many of the diffuse benign pulmonary disease, making accurate diagnosis paramount. Okay? Each, each of these disorders may occur due to intrinsic or extrinsic injury. For instance, the pneumonosis are due to the inhalation of damaging foreign material into the lung, while HP is due to an allergic response to foreign material or medication. On the, on the other hand, interstitial lung disease such as EPF, sarcoidosis, and lymphangiomyomatosis or LAM, or LAM, eosinophilic granulomatosis or EG, and the pulmonary disorder are associated with collagen vascular disease are believed to be due to intrinsic lung inflammation and injury. The benign diffuse lung disease may also be categorized based on physiologic presentation, particularly the type of change seen by pulmonary function studies. Some of the disorder are associated with an obstructive ventilatory defect or LAM, e.g., restrictive ventilatory defect (PF) or non-specific interstitial pneumonitis or asbestosis, while other may present with combined obstruction and restriction sarcoidosis, bronchiolitis obliterans with organizing pneumonia or BOOP. Finally, this disease may be categorized based on radiographic findings. Example, diffuse interstitial infiltrate, alveolar infiltrate, cystic lesion, and honeycombing. This chapter reviews the most common benign pulmonary disease, including clinical presentation, diagnosis, and treatment. Next, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, or EPF, or usual interstitial pneumonitis. EPF is a progressive fatal disease with no known cause. This manifests by diffuse interstitial lung scarring with a predominance with fibrosis in the subpleural and lower lung zones. This disease has several different names, including cryptogenic fibrosing alveolitis, usual interstitial pneumonitis, and EPF. EPF, or idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, is a progressive, refractory to the therapy, and ultimately leads to respiratory compromise and death, usually within 5 years of diagnosis. The typical patient presents within the seven decade of life with gradual onset of shortness of breath and dry, non-productive cough. Young patients can be affected, however, particularly in familial forms of the disease. EPF is frequently misdiagnosed as pneumonia because common symptoms of cough and dyspnea are associated with pulmonary infiltrates. However, the protracted course and lack of fever and prolonged sputum make pneumonia less likely. Uh, Protracted course, lack of fever, and prolonged sputum. Yeah. Physically, physical examination typically demonstrated bilateral Velcro-like crevices, predominantly in the lung bases. Resting or exercise-induced hypoxemia is often present. Chest radiographs show small lung volumes with interstitial infiltrate predominantly in the lower and peripheral lung zone. High-resolution computed tomography (HRCT) of the chest can help distinguish the diagnosis of EPF from the other interstitial lung disorder. Typical findings include peripheral and lower lung zones, interstitial thickening and honeycombing, and traction bronchiectasis. The fibrosis and honeycombing may be interspersed with relatively normal appearing lung parenchyma. Pulmonary function studies show a restrictive ventilatory defect with a low diffusing capacity for carbon monoxide, or DLCO. As the disease progresses, the total lung capacity, vital capacity, and DLCO fall, indicating worsening fibrosis. In the early stages of the disease, oxygen desaturation may occur only with exercise, but as the disease progresses, severe resting hypoxemia is a common finding. This is a postero, posterior chest X-ray of a patient with EPF and small lung volume and lower lung interstitial infiltrate. The diagnosis of EPF is established by open lung biopsy together with appropriate clinical and radiographic findings. Transbronchial bronchoscopy biopsies are frequently performed by many practitioners for interstitial lung disease and may be useful to exclude other diagnoses such as sarcoidosis, BOP, eosinophilic pneumonia, or extrinsic allergic alveolitis. However, transbronchial biopsy are inadequate to establish diagnosis of EPF because a larger tissue sample is necessary to visualize the geographic changes in condition uh, in this condition. These include areas of fibrosis and honeycombing interposed between areas of normal appearing lung. Thus, video-assisted thoracic cervical or VATS biopsy has become a standard approach if a tissue diagnosis is warranted. It is important to note that there is controversy regarding the need to establish a tissue diagnosis when all clinical and radiographic findings suggest the diagnosis of IPF. This is particularly true for older patients and those with far advanced disease. For those patients who are younger with atypical findings, open biopsy should be considered. Uh, we can see in the figure of 5.2 yang bagian A, high resolution of CT in EPF, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, showing a peripheral interstitial fibrotic infiltrate with areas of traction bronchiectasis interspersed with areas of normal lung parenchyma. Okay, and a B, close-up of view HRCT, high resolution computed tomography showing a marked honeycombing and interstitial fibrotic changes in a patient with EPF. Okay. And the figure 5.3, histologic appearance of EPF from an open lung biopsy. Notes areas honeycombing with interstitial thickening and fibrosis. There is no known effective medical treatment of EPF. High-dose corticosteroid 1 mg per kilogram methylprednisolone given for several weeks and followed by gradual tapering has been mainstay of therapy for many years, with a few patients improving. One study showed a minimal improvement with a combination of prednisone and azathioprine, but widespread success with this approach has not been reported. Other potent agents such as cyclophosphamide have been used, also with limited success. Gamma interferon has also been studied, but has a little clinical benefit. For a patient below 65 years of age who are otherwise healthy, lung transplantation remains the only viable treatment option for IPF. Okay, next. Non-specific interstitial pneumonitis. After Lebow and Carrington proposed the first Mayer classification scheme for the adiabatic interstitial pneumonia (EEP), several investigators found that a significant number of biopsies didn't fit into the described subtypes. The term non-specific interstitial pneumonitis first used by Katzenstein represent a distinct histologic type of interstitial pneumonitis with clinical characteristics that differ from UEP or IPF. Although NSEP and IPF may be clinically indistinguishable, there are some differences that may help to differentiate these two diagnoses. Patients with NSIP typically present with subacute symptoms rather than the insidious onset characteristic of IPF. Fever is also common complaint among patients with NSIP and is rare in IPF. Radiographically, NSIP typically has diffuse bilateral ground glass opacities on HRCT. Honeycombing is a hallmark feature of IPF, but is not present in NSIP. Alveolar infiltrates and occasionally nodules have been described in NSIP, but these are not common. The diagnosis of NSIP is made by open or fast lung biopsy. Katzenstein originally divided biopsies among three groups based on, on the amount of fibrosis present. Group 1 consisted of interstitial infiltrates with predominant lymphocyte, occasional plasma cells, and minimally fibrosis. The infiltrates were not to be temporally uniform in a contrast to the lesion of UAP, which is temporally heterogeneous. Group 2 contained the interstitial infiltrates but had marked amount of associated fibrosis, and Group 3 is include marked distortion of the lung architecture from collagen deposition, scoring, and occasionally honeycombing. The prognosis of NSAP is much better than that for IPF. The majority of patients will improve or recover 74% in one series. However, in likelihood of improvement depends on the severity of fibrosis. Patients with Katzenstein group 3 or NSIP are severe fibrosis have the least favorable prognosis. Corticosteroids with or without other immunosuppressive agents are the mainstay of the therapy. However, it is important to note that there are no randomized control trials or RCT proving that benefit for any form of therapy, and a number of patients have improved without specific treatment. We can see in a figure 5.4 open lung biopsy specimen from patient with non-specific interstitial pneumonitis showing a diffuse interstitial thickening with inflammatory cells and collagen. Okay, next. Cryptogenic organizing pneumonia or bronchiolitis obliterans organizing pneumonia, COP or BOOP. Cryptogenic organizing pneumonia or bronchiolitis obliterans organizing pneumonia. First described in 1983 and then again in 1985 under the name of BOOP or cryptogenic organizing pneumonia or COP is an increasingly recognized cause of pulmonary disease. Disagreement continues to exist regarding the name for this process, thus, but the names are used interchangeably. Although the term of BOP is more commonly used in the US, COP is preferred as designed by American Thoracic Society and European Respiratory Society. COP specifically refers to the idiopathic form of the disease. However, organizing pneumonia, the histologic correlate has been identified in association with a variety of diseases, as well as drug and inhalation exposure. COP can present in a variety of forms. The most common is non-resolving pneumonia. Patient typically complain fevers, cough, and malaise. Myalgia have been described in a number of patients. Symptoms usually are present for several months, and patients may have been treated with one or multiple courses of antibiotics without significant improvement. Inspiratory squeaks are often present on physical examination. Mild leukocytosis is common, as well as elevated erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which may be sometimes over 100. Pulmonary function testing can be shown a combination of restriction and obstruction as well as reduced diffusion capacity, and frank hypoxemia is rare. Chest radiography typically shows multiple areas of patchy alveolar infiltrate bilaterally. CT scan is most commonly shows that areas of consolidation with air bronchogram. However, a variety of other patterns have also been described. These range from a diffuse nodular pattern to band-like areas of consolidation. Pleural effusion are uncommon. We can be seen in the figure of 5.5. Chest CT showing the patchy infiltrate characteristic of BOOP. Okay. Figure 5.6 histopathologic specimen from patient with BOP, not the tubes of loss collagen plugging the airway. The diagnosis of COP is made by lung biopsy, which show the histologic feature of organizing pneumonia. Although the transbronchial biopsy are most sufficient, the small biopsy obtained by this procedure may insufficient to in distinguish distinguish the process from other underlying pathology. It is important to exclude other process since organizing pneumonia can be sometimes be found in association with other entities such as fibrotic disease. PATS or open lung biopsy may be necessary in some circumstances to establish firm diagnosis. Treatment consists of glucocorticoid for 6 to 12 months, and patients typically have a good response with a close to third having a clinical remission within a short time. However, relapse while tapering steroid are common. Relapse typically respond to reinstitution of higher doses of glucocorticoid and do not appear to affect the long-term course of the disease. CLP has had other notable presentation. Focal lesions resembling solitary lung nodules have been described by a number of authors. The diagnosis was typically found after surgical resection, which stemmed from the concern that nodules were a malignant process. The patient tend to do well without any further treatment. A rapidly progressive form COP has also been described. This form advances much more rapidly with a fulminant course and high mortality. Next, acute interstitial pneumonia or AIP. AIP. AIP is a rapidly progressive interstitial disease with typically a fulminant course. It typically presents with a viral-like prodrome of myalgia, fever, and chills and malaise. Patients usually present within 3 weeks of onset of the illness and the most require mechanical ventilation. CT reveals diffuse ground glass opacification, to a lesser extent bacillar airspace consolidation. The histologic lesion is that diffuse alveolar damage. Mortality is high, well over 50%, and there is no effective therapy. Respiratory bronchiolitis associated interstitial lung disease and desquamative interstitial pneumonia, RBILD and DIP. Respiratory bronchiolitis is a pathologic lesion found in cigarette smokers. It is characterized by a pigmented macrophage in the lumens of the first and second order respiratory bronchioles. These lesions are most often seen incidentally on biopsies done for unrelated reasons and rarely cause symptoms. However, a small percentage of patients do present with clinically significant interstitial disease with this lesion on biopsy. The clinical condition is termed RBILD. The clinical spectrum ranges from a minimal complaints to severe dyspnea. The most common symptoms are gradually progressive dyspnea and new or worsening cough. Males are more likely to be affected than females. CT typically reveals centrilobular nodules, thickened airways, and sometimes ground glass opacification. Patients almost universally improve with cessation of smoking. The pathologic lesion of DIP is a accumulation of macrophage in the alveolar space because of its similar male predominance, association with cigarette smoking, and the presence of macrophage. DIP is thought to be represent one end of the spectrum of disease, where the other end would be RBILD. However, there are some differences, such as the uniform presence of ground glass opacification seen DIP. Honeycombing can be seen in DIP, but only in a minority of patients, and it tends to be very limited in extent. As with RBILD, the prognosis is good, with smoking cessation thought to be important. Patients with DIP are commonly treated with corticosteroid, but there have been no treatment trials proving benefit. Next, lymphoid interstitial pneumonia, or LIP. LIP is the last of IIP, included in the recent consensus of classification. This disease most often seen a combination of other diseases, such as Sjogren syndrome, acquired immunodeficiency syndromes, various autoimmune disease, and Castleman disease. The disease tends to be affect women more than men. Initial presentation include slowly progressive shortness of breath, uh, cough, and weight loss. CT typically reveals a pattern of bilateral diffuse or patchy ground glass opacification with a poorly defined centrilobular nodules. thickening of the bronchiovascular bundles, and irregular septal thickening are also common. Cystic changes are not in the majority of patients, but honeycombing is less common. The histology of LIP is marked by a dense infiltration with lymphocyte and plasma cells. The infiltration is especially marked in alveolar septum. Lymphoid follicles and germinal centers are commonly seen. The prognosis is highly variable, with the majority of patients remaining stable or improving. However, over one-third patients may have progressive disease. Treatment usually consists of corticosteroid with or without other immunosuppressive agent. Next, interstitial lung disease associated with collagen vascular disease. The collagen vascular disease present with a wide range of symptoms and findings, and they have variable courses. Given the systemic nature of the disease, it is not unexpected to find that patients commonly develop pulmonary pathology. The full range of known complications is beyond scope of this chapter and have been described in detail elsewhere. The complications are not limited to the lung parenchyma, but rather include all aspects of the respiratory system as well as the respiratory muscle, pleural space, upper airway, and pulmonary vasculature. The, the complications also do not always represent in a direct injury caused by the underlying collagen vascular disease. Some of the therapies for this disease have pulmonary side effects, such as methotrexate-induced lung injury in patients being treated for rheumatoid arthritis or pulmonary infection for immunosuppression. B. Bacillar fibrosis from repeated aspiration due to esophageal dysmotility from scleroderma has been well described. Histologically, the types of interstitial disease found include those that have been previously mentioned. These comprise non-specific interstitial pneumonia, UIP, and BOOP. Other forms of interstitial disease have also been described, including lymphocytic interstitial pneumonia and diffuse alveolar damage. Prognosis depends on the histologic type of interstitial disease and is largely similar to that seen in a patient without underlying collagen vascular disease. Next, sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis is a multi-organ disease, with almost all cases having pulmonary manifestation at some point during its course. Pulmonary manifestation range from asymptomatic hilar adenopathy to endobronchial involvement with airflow limitation to diffuse nodule to end-stage lung fibrosis. Sarcoidosis has worldwide distribution and affect different racial and ethnic groups variably. In the United States, annual incidence estimates are 10.9 cases per 100,000 whites and 35.5 cases per 100,000 blacks. The etiology remains unknown, but some epidemiologic research support an infectious etiology, whereas other evidence suggests an environmental exposure. The clinical presentation of pulmonary sarcoidosis is highly variable. Probably the most common is asymptomatic hilar adenopathy found on chest radiography, done for unrelated reason. Common pulmonary symptoms include cough, dyspnea, or retrosternal chest pain. Systemic symptomatic include fatigue, weight loss, and malaise. Lofgren syndrome is notably acute presentation of sarcoidosis, characterized by a triad of hilar lymphadenopathy, polyarthralgia, and erythema nodosum. Sarcoidosis is staged by chest radiograph. Stage 1 is disease is defined as presence of hilar lymphadenopathy with other parenchymal infiltrates, like a figure of 5-7, whereas stage 2 includes hilar lymphadenopathy with infiltrates, and in stage 3 disease, there are infiltrates without hilar lymphadenopathy, and stage 4 disease is defined by presence of end-stage fibrosis. Consequently, sarcoidosis affect the upper and mid lung zones. Small nodule ranging in size from 2 mm to 1 cm in diameter are the most common findings. The nodule typically found around the bronchovascular bundles, patchy areas of airspace consolidation can also be seen, leading to the term of alveolar sarcoidosis. Mediastinal adenopathy is very common on CT, and calcification present in approximately 50% of patients, typically in a focal or axial pattern. Uh, As we see in a figure of 5.7, chest X-ray showing a bilateral hilar adenopathy without pulmonary infiltrate, depicting stage 1 pulmonary sarcoidosis. So the main focus is hilar adenopathy and without pulmonary infiltrate. And stage 2 in figure of 5.8, bilateral fibrotic changes as seen as stage 4 pulmonary sarcoidosis. Okay. Histologically, the lesion of sarcoidosis is the non-caseating granuloma. Granuloma are tightly packed and composed epithelial cells, including multinucleated giant cells and lymphocytes. This lesion can be found in lymph node and lung parenchyma and airway mucosa. However, non-caseating granuloma are not unique to sarcoidosis, and other etiologies must be excluded clinically and pathologically, including fungal and mycobacterial disease, HP, pneumonia,sis such as beryllium-induced lung disease, and drug reaction. No treatment is needed for asymptomatic patients with hilar adenopathy. The majority of these patients and patients with Lofgren syndrome will have complete spontaneous remission. Corticosteroids are the mainstay of the treatment for symptomatic sarcoidosis, and other immunosuppressive agents such as cyclophosphamide, methotrexate, and azathioprine are reserved for patients with chronic non-steroid responsive disease, although there is little literature to fully support their use. Pulmonary alveolar proteinosis (PAP) or PAP is a rare disease first described by Rosen and colleagues in 1858. In 1958, the hallmark of this disorder is the thick proteinaceous material that fills the alveolar space and impairs gas exchange. The disease is now recognized to exist in three forms: acquired, congenital, and secondary. The acquired forms represent over 90% of all reported cases, and is the type mainly discussed here. Acquired PAP typically affect men in the fifth decade of life. The symptoms tend to be gradual in onset, with a median of 7 months before diagnosis. Common complaints include progressive dyspnea, cough, and fatigue. Low-grade fever have been reported, but higher temperatures suggest a superimposed infection. Physical examination findings are non-specific, frequently normal despite significant hypoxemia. The radiographic appearance is non-specific, with a typically bilateral alveolar filling process, but interstitial patterns can coexist or predominate. HRCT scans show ground glass opacification in a geographic pattern. CT may also show interlobular thickening of the septa, producing the crazy paving pattern. Historically, open lung biopsy was required for a diagnosis. However, more recent experience has shown that bronchoscopic technique can reliably diagnose the majority of the patient. BAL produce a characteristic milky return, which represent proteinaceous material with accumulation in the alveolar spaces. Transbronchial biopsy have a highly diagnostic yield as well. The treatment of PAP has been with whole lung lavage under general anesthesia with a double lumen endotracheal tube. This procedure produced significant and durable improvement in clinical, physiologic, and radiographic parameters. However, the majority of patients will need repeated lavage over time. Recent studies have found a link between granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor GM-CSF and PAP. Initial studies found that GM-CSF is knockout. Mice develop a lung disease similar to PAP. Further studies have found that most patients with acquired PAP have blocking antibodies to GM-CSF in lavage, fluid, and serum. These findings have led to novel approach of using exogenous GM-CSF as treatment with some success in a small case series. Next, eosinophilic lung disease. The eosinophilic lung disease constitutes a wide range of processes with a common finding of eosinophil in the serum, lavage fluid, and or histology. Early classification include the syndrome of pulmonary infiltrate with eosinophilia (PEA). However, peripheral eosinophilia is variable in some process, and thus it is not inclusive in the full range of disease. The most current terminology is used here as a review of the important processes likely to be encountered. This include acute and chronic eosinophilic pneumonia or CEP, Church-Strauss syndrome, and allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis or APA. A discussion of all other diseases include in this category is beyond the scope of this chapter. Okay. First one is simple eosinophilic pneumonia or Loeffler syndrome. Loeffler syndrome was first described in 1932. Consists of migration of pulmonary infiltrate and blood eosinophilia. Patients are typically asymptomatic or have only minimal symptoms. These radiographs are usually described as a combination of interstitial and alveolar pattern that are migratory and peripheral located and often based in the pleura. Infiltrate can be unilateral or bilateral. The underlying etiology when found has usually been linked to a parasitic infection. Ascaris infection has classically been described. Drug reaction has have also been found. Patients typically have full, full resolution of radiographic and blood abnormalities within 1 month. This resolution is usually spontaneous and rarely requires treatment with corticosteroid. Pathologic specimens are seldom required to confirm the diagnosis. Next, idiopathic acute eosinophilic pneumonia (EAEP) is a rare disease that has typically been reported in otherwise young, healthy individuals. Since the first report in 1989, around 100 cases have been described. This is a diagnosis of exclusion with a characteristic presentation that includes an acute febrile illness, usually of less than 5 days duration, bilateral infiltrates, and hypoxemic respiratory failures, and, and significant bowel eosinophilia. Bowel. EAEP can easily mimic atypical pneumonia and acute respiratory distress syndrome or ARDS. The typical presentation is a febrile illness with dyspnea, cough, myalgia, pleuritic chest pain, and respiratory distress. Mechanical ventilation is frequently required. Chest X-ray invariably shows bilateral infiltrates, which are usually diffuse and can be alveolar, interstitial, or mixture of both. Only a minority of patients present with peripheral eosinophilia. However, the subsequent development of eosinophilia has been reported in as many as 68% of patients in one series. BAL is recommended in suspect in suspected cases to demonstrate the characteristic eosinophilia in the Lafarge fleet. Eosinophil count representing 40 to 50% of the differential is typical. When done, transbronchial biopsies and open lung biopsies have found varying stages of diffuse alveolar damage, including with marked interstitial and alveolar infiltration with eosinophils. Because EIAP is a diagnosis of exclusion, the second role of lavage and/or biopsy is to rule out the presence of an underlying infectious etiology. Treatment generally consists of corticosteroid with a relatively short duration. Patients will generally have a rapid response with improvement within 1 to 2 days. Relapse after discontinuation of steroid is not characteristic, and the absence of relapse has been suggested as diagnostic criterion. In one series, almost 25% of patients improve spontaneously without the use of corticosteroid. Next, chronic eosinophilic pneumonia. Although this process was originally described by Christoforidis and Molnar in 1960, most authors give the credit to Carrington and co-workers, who published the first large series in 1969. As compared with acute eosinophilic pneumonia, CEP has a more subacute presentation and causes a milder symptoms. In one series of 107 patients, the average duration of symptoms before diagnosis was 7.7 months. Patients tend to be in their fourth to fifth decade of presentation. A 2 equal 1 female to male ratio has been noted. A history of atopy occurs in a one-half patient, with asthma being the most common form. Presenting complaints have included cough, fever, dyspnea, and weight loss. Other notable symptoms seen in approximately one-third of patients include sputum production, wheezing, and night sweats. Diagnostic tests can be very helpful in the diagnosis of CAP. Peripheral eosinophilia is very common, occurring in the 88%, 88 to 95% of patients, with a mean value to 26 to 32%. Other laboratory values are also elevated, including erythrocyte sedimentation rate and serum IgA level. Bile contains a very highly level of eosinophils, representing 25% over 40% of total cell. Chest radiography has classically been reported as showing the photographic negative of pulmonary edema. However, a more recent series of patients have shown that only 25% have this finding. The most common findings are peripheral bilateral infiltrate that were described as consolidated ground glass or a mixture of both. Upper lobe predominance is more common than lower lobe. Migratory opacities, pleural effusion, and cavity are uncommon. It sometimes help to show the peripheral nature of the infiltrates. Mediastinal adenopathy has been shown in 3 to 6 patients with one series and 7 to 40 patients in another. Biopsy typically reveals intra-alveolar exudate rich with eosinophils and histiocytes. The surrounding interstitium is frequently also infiltrated with eosinophil and histiocytes. Approximately 50% of patients may also have interstitial fibrosis. At times, mild vasculitis is seen. Coexisting BOOP is also frequent findings. Some authors suggest that patients with typical clinical presentation and typical radiographic findings can be treated empirically. Others would favor the addition of bronchoscopy with lavage to confirm the presence of increased eosinophils. However, the most favor empiric trials of corticosteroid. Patients typically show rapid improvement in symptoms, usually within 24 to 48 of hours. followed in time by radiographic resolution. This rapid response is felt to be characteristic and confirm the diagnosis. The lack of prompt response should suggest an alternative diagnosis and consideration of a biopsy. Unlike acute eosinophilic pneumonia, CAP is characterized by high rate of relapse when patients are when off steroid. Most authors have recommended prolonged course of steroid on the order of 6 months to 1 year. Although relapses are common, they respond well to increased dose of steroid. Next, pulmonary Langerhans cell histiocytosis, histiocytosis, or eosinophilic granuloma, ELCH, also known as eosinophilic granuloma, or EG, is a rare form of diffuse lung disease, although most commonly found affecting the lungs solely. Langerhans cell histiocytosis can involve multiple organs, including the bone, skin, pituitary gland, and other organs. Langerhans cells are normally found in a small number in the lung, where they function as antigen-presenting cells. In PLCH, the population of Langerhans cells is expanded, with destructive consequences for the parenchyma. The etiology for expansion of this cell population is unknown. Affected individuals tend to be in their third to fourth decade at the time of diagnosis. The vast majority of patients diagnosed with PLCH are current smokers. Ya, ini gambar figur 511 PAH chest X-ray of 43 years old patient with eosinophilic pneumonia, EAP. EAP. Note the peripheral infiltrate which are characteristic of this process, BNC. Transbronchial biopsy of eosinophilic pneumonia sustained with hematoxylin and eosin. Note the descator eosinophilus within the interstitium, hence eosinophilic granulus in the interstitium. At the presentation, approximately 1/4 patients will be asymptomatic. Common symptoms include non-productive cough, deep snore with exertion, and politic chest pain. In one study, 11% of patients had experienced spontaneous pneumothorax. Chest radiograph typically reveals bilateral reticulonodular and interstitial infiltration with upper and middle lobe predominance. Cystic changes are common and may be predominant lesion in the later stage of the disease. Similar findings on the CT in the proper clinical context are felt to be diagnostic, thus obviating the need for open lung biopsy. The course of illness is highly variable. Most patients will have resolution of symptoms and radiographically abnormalities with smoking cessation, but a small percentage will go on end-stage lung disease. Corticosteroids have been variably used, but there is no consensus as to their utility. Lung transplantation has been advocate for patients with end-stage disease. However, there are reported recurrence in the transplanted lung. Next, allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis (APA) or ABPA occurs up to 28% of the patients with steroid-dependent asthma and 15% of patients with cystic fibrosis. The disease occurs with a patient have a complex immune response to antigens expressed by Aspergillus that is colonizing the bronchial mucosa. Although most commonly associated with a fungus, Aspergillus fumigatus, this allergic process has been described with other fungi, including Candida, Penicillium, and other species of Aspergillus, including Aspergillus flavus. The diagnosis of APA is based on a variety of clinical, radiographic, and laboratory findings. Suggested criteria including history of asthma, or cystic fibrosis, immediate cutaneous reactivity to Aspergillus species, and elevated total IgA up to 1000 nanogram per milliliter, elevated serum IgA antibodies to Aspergillus fumigatus, precipitating antibodies to Aspergillus fumigatus, central bronchiectasis, and chest X-ray infiltrates. Tracking peripheral blood eosinophila is a common as well as sputum culture in a that grow Aspergillus species. Symptoms commonly include wheezing, cough, fever, and anorexia. Sputum production is also common with a dirty green plaques. During an exacerbation, chest radiograph may reveal fleeting pulmonary infiltrate as well as dense infiltrate in the central bronchioles, giving this to a glove finger appearance. Corticosteroids are cornerstone of the therapy to treat and reduce the frequency of exacerbation. Most authorities recommend initial treatment for several months, followed by a slow taper. Some patients will go into clinical remission, but the majority will require continuing long therapy for intermittent exacerbation. Recent several studies have suggested a role for the oral antifungal itraconazole as a steroid-sparing agent. Next, hypersensitivity pneumonitis. HP is a clinical sorry. HP is a clinical diverse disease process that results from the inhalation of variety of antigens. Farmer lungs is the classic example, but numerous other examples of HP has also known as extrinsic allergic alveolitis have been described. The hallmark of this disease is an individual immunologic response to inhaled antigen. In order for HP to develop, first, the patient must be exposed to potential antigen. Second, the antigen must be sufficient a small size, usually below 3 nanometer, to travel through the respiratory tract and be deposited in a alveolus and distal bronchial tree. And the third must be an immune response resulting inflammatory reaction. A multitude exposure to a variety of antigens have been documented and described. Most forms of HP have been associated with antigens from fungi and bacteria such as Mucor stolonifer, which causes paprika slicer lung in people who work with moldy paprika pods, and Thermoactinomyces vulgaris, which cause bagasosis in people who work with moldy sugarcane. Oh, so bagasosis is one form of persensitivity pneumonitis. Pigeon's breeder lung is caused by exposure to animal proteins found in bird droppings, feathers, and sorghum. A variety of chemicals have been implicated in HP, including hydrophthalic anhydride, which causes epoxy resin lung in people who work with heated epoxy resin. Although many people may be exposed to an antigen through occupation or hobbies, only a small percentage will go on to develop HP. For example, in one study, only 8% of pigeons breeders in the Canary Islands were found to meet criteria for pigeons breeders lung. In most studies, only 5 to 15% of exposed people go on develop feature of HP. The host factor that determine the whether an individual will develop an inflammatory reaction have yet to be determined. HP has classically been subdivided into three forms: acute, subacute, and chronic. Acute hypersensitivity pneumonitis. The acute form of HP is thought to occur after a large inhalation of exposure to an antigen. Characteristic symptoms including fever, chills, deep snow, and chest tightness, cough, and malaise. Symptoms usually begin within 4 to 8 hours of exposure and resolve 24 to 48 hours later. Patients typically describe similar symptoms after repeated exposure. Chest radiograph can show diffuse ground glass opacification or reticulonodular infiltrate. Lower lobe predominant is common. Lung function tests can reveal a receptive defect as well as impaired diffusion. Yeah. Chest CT of 45-year-old woman with acute hypersensitivity pneumonitis from exposure to a pet bird. Bilateral ground glass opacification. Next, subacute and chronic hypersensitivity pneumonitis. Unlike acute HP, subacute and chronic forms have an insidious onset of cough, and deep snow. Other, com- Other common symptoms include fatigue, malaise, and weight loss. Few others make distinction between subacute and chronic forms other than to suggest the patient with subacute HP can experience episode of symptoms similar to acute HP. A major difference between acute HP is a tendency to develop parenchymal fibrosis in some cases leading to end-stage lung disease. This patient can also develop right heart failure and digital clubbing. Chest X-ray and CT in chronic form have marked fibrosis and ground glass attenuation. Centrilobular, poorly defined micronodules are very suggestive HP in both the acute and chronic forms. Pulmonary function testing usually reveals restriction and decreased diffusion, but a small percentage of patients have also been shown to develop an obstructive defect, regardless of smoking history. As there are no definitive tests, the diagnosis of HP is largely based on clinical presentation and history. Suggested diagnostic criteria typically include 1. A history of exposure to known antigen, 2. Serum precipitating antibodies to the suspected antigen, and 3. Historic common symptom temporarily related to antigen exposure, 4. An appropriate response to an inhalation challenge, 5. Compatible result from radiographic and pulmonary function tests, and 6. Granulomatous interstitial pneumonitis. With this framework, several key points need further discussion. Through history of a possible exposure, occupational and domestic is an important to discern possible antigens. However, in regard to subacute and chronic form, the insidious nature of the disease may prevent the identification of likely antigen. Although supportive and finding precipitating antibodies is not diagnostic, as high number of exposed people will develop antibody response, but will not have detectable disease. Alternatively, the absence of antibodies doesn't rule out HP owing the lack of standardized antigen testing in laboratory. Inhalation challenges exposure the patient to the suspected antigen in either natural environment or in a hospital setting, and monitoring for clinical response have been used mainly to research setting. Invasive diagnostic testing include bowel and lung biopsy, uh, typically used in cases where the diagnosis is less apparent. Bowel usually reveals marked lymphocytosis with the inversion of the CD4 to CD8 ratio. However, this is very variable and may be depend on the type of HP and host factor. The histologic HP can also be variable. Findings of cellular bronchiolitis, lymphoplasmacytic interstitial infiltrates, and poorly formed granulomas are considered typical. However, multiple other patterns, including UAP and NSIP, have also been described. Most experts agree that the first goal of treatment is eliminating exposure to the inciting agent, antigen. However, repeated exposure to inhaled antigen doesn't necessarily lead to chronic form with fibrosis, but currently there is no way to predict the patient will have progressive form of the disease. There is no consensus for the use of corticosteroid. RCT using corticosteroid in former lung so that corticosteroid lead to a more rapid improvement in pulmonary function, but there was no difference in outcome after 5 years. Interesting, interest, Interestingly, patients who were treated with corticosteroid tend to have more frequent episodes. Next, drug-induced lung disease. The true incidence of drug-induced lung is unknown, owing to the absence of definitive diagnostic studies and the high rate underlying pulmonary disease among patients, making it difficult to establish definitive causal of relationship. Histologically, the majority of the injury pattern resemble this of disorder already discussed. This include non-specific interstitial pneumonia, organizing pneumonia, eosinophilic pneumonia, NHP. Other pattern in, in Other pattern of injury include diffuse alveolar damage, pulmonary hemorrhage, and edema. Two of the more common clinically encountered drug toxicities are discussed below. Okay. The first one is methotrexate-induced lung injury. The spectrum of methotrexate pulmonary toxicity is wide, including interstitial disease, pleural effusion, fibrosis, and non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema. The most commonly reported toxicity is interstitial pneumonitis, which has been variably termed uh, methotrexate pneumonitis, acute interstitial pneumonitis, and HP. The true frequency is unknown, with reports range from 2 to 10% of patients. It usually presents with subacute symptoms of cough, dyspnea, and low-grade fever. Referral eosinophilia has been reported up to 40% of patients. Pulmonary function tests typically reveal a receptive pattern with a reduced diffusion capacity. Chest radiographs have usually shown that bilateral, predominantly bacillar interstitial pattern, alveolar and nodular pattern, as well as pleural effusion and adenopathy have also been reported. Lung biopsy reveals a lymphocytic infiltration of the interstitium. Granulomas and eosinophilia are seen in some cases. Methotrexate pneumonitis can also at any time. Methotrexate pneumonitis can occur at any time during therapy, and dose and route of therapy do not appear to predict its occurrence. Most people will recover completely after cessation of methotrexate. Corticosteroids are generally recommended for patients with significant impairment. Then, amiodarone pulmonary toxicity. For clinical presentation of amiodarone pulmonary toxicity have been described: interstitial pneumonitis, ARDS, BOP, and pulmonary nodules. The most common is interstitial pneumonitis. The presentation is typically subacute and it tends to occur after several months of therapy. Although it can be occur at any dose, it does so easily in the context of higher daily dosage, uh, above 40-100 milligram per day. Patient complaints frequent include cough, dyspnea, fever, and pleuritic chest pain. There are no diagnostic studies for amiodarone pulmonary toxicity. Laboratory studies are non-specific but can show leukocytosis and elevated erythrocyte sedimentation rates. Pulmonary function studies reveal decreased diffusion capacity. Chest radiograph reveal patchy bilateral interstitial infiltrate. Lung biopsy is of limited value, as the findings are non-specific. Alveolar accumulation of foamy macrophage occurs in people taking amiodarone with or without clinical disease. Other findings, including type 2 pneumocyte hyperplasia and the alveolar septal thickening. Treatment consists of discontinuing amiodarone. The majority of cases slowly resolve due in a part of the prolonged half-life of the agent. Corticosteroids have had anecdotal success in some cases. For some patients in whom the use of alternatively antiarrhythmic agent was not possible, a strategy of low-dose corticosteroid while continuing amiodarone has had some success.